What's up guys, I'm BTC. Now that we're in Season 10 and the dive meta is all but gone, Reinhardt has been making a reappearance. But it's become quite clear that there are some pretty big issues with the character, and he's likely in need of a buff. We've had dive meta be the dominant comp for the last 4 or 5 competitive seasons. And when you only have 6, 7, or 8 characters that are really being used on a fully regular basis, it makes it difficult to judge the effectiveness of the other characters, especially when there's been a lot of balance changes from the beginning of dive comp until now, with D.Va, with Mercy, and several others. So when all of that stuff is changing, but you're not using other characters during that time period, how can you tell if they've been kind of left behind? And that is kind of what we're seeing with Reinhardt right now. And it's weird because at the very beginning, when Overwatch first came out, Reinhardt was the tank. He was pretty much the only tank at the time. And that's because Orisa was still about a year away from being released. Roadhog had a really good hook, but everything else about his kit was just garbage. D.Va was an incredibly bad character, really low damage, her defense matrix was just worthless, and her ultimate was pretty terrible when the game first came out. And then you have Winston. Dive comp hadn't been a thing yet, so Winston was almost completely avoided. On top of that, his bubble was really bad because the effective cooldown on it was between 15 to 18 seconds because the cooldown didn't start until the bubble actually went away. And then, of course, you had Zarya, who actually was pretty decent and a good complement, an off-tank or a bruiser, if you will, but not the full tank that Reinhardt is. So Reinhardt, for a long time, was the guy. And then we had dive comp, and Reinhardt just dropped off the map. Now, prior to the start of Season 10, we did have a little bit of the more traditional kind of tanking, non-dive stuff, but it was always used with Orisa because the barrier that she can provide, the defenses she provides, is just so much better than what Reinhardt can offer. And whenever you have these kind of barrier versus barrier battles, the Orisa will always beat the Reinhardt for a couple of reasons. One, she can just replace it, and it's very easy. She doesn't have to step away and leave her team vulnerable whenever she needs to kind of reset the barrier. She just drops another one right in front of her, whereas Reinhardt has to step away and let it recharge. And then, of course, when Reinhardt is holding his barrier, he can't do anything. He's only holding the barrier, and that is it. Whereas with Orisa, she can actually attack and help destroy the enemy barrier. So whenever you have those barrier versus barrier situations, Reinhardt was already on the losing end. And now we get to Season 10, and we have Brigitte, who is effectively a hard counter to Reinhardt. Brigitte was specifically designed to be anti-dive, and she does that quite well. She counters Tracer and Genji and Winston. But the problem is she also counters the frontline tanks far too well. Specifically, we're talking about Reinhardt, where she can just get in, shield bash him, Reinhardt drops his shield, and then the rest of your team just obliterates the Reinhardt. It's the same thing every single time, pretty much. Now, I know people have talked about, oh, well, we just need to increase the cooldown on Brigitte's shield bash. That's not going to do anything. Whether it's a 5-second or a 10-second cooldown on the shield bash, it doesn't matter. The end result is the same. Brigitte will shield bash the Reinhardt, he drops his shield, and then he gets obliterated. It's the same thing. The only thing you could do is you could just completely remove the shield bash, and I know some people might like that, but then that would completely eliminate Brigitte's anti-dive capabilities, and then we would be right back where we began with just the overwhelming dive comp meta that would just come back. As I said, Brigitte counters Reinhardt, but what it should be is the exact opposite. Reinhardt should be countering Brigitte. It makes sense both from a gameplay standpoint and the lore, if you care about that stuff. I mean, Reinhardt is the knight, and Brigitte is just the squire. So what should be happening is there needs to be some changes to Reinhardt so that he can more effectively counter Brigitte and make her less powerful without damaging her ability to still function in that anti-dive kind of capacity. So Reinhardt needs those buffs. Now, we have to be careful about this because Reinhardt is a type of character where if you overtune him a little too much, then he's just going to be unbelievably powerful. There's three main issues that need to be addressed. The first is the barrier battle against Orisa. The second is getting countered way too hard by Brigitte. And then the third kind of falls into that a little bit, which is just Reinhardt's lack of defenses against any kind of CC. And in case you didn't know, I get asked this question a lot. CC stands for crowd control. It's stuns, slows, knockbacks, immobilize, any sort of that stuff. That's all crowd control, CC for short. For the first one, against Orisa, there needs to be some differences between how their barriers are handled. You don't want basically them to have the exact same kind of health. You want both characters to bring something unique. And I think what the difference is right now is Orisa can have those stationary barriers and Reinhardt has the movable barrier. The problem is the movable barrier is way weaker than Orisa's stationary barrier. So the solution would be to very slightly increase the health of Reinhardt's, but also make it recharge a little bit faster. So that way, when it does get low or when it just completely breaks, he still has to back away and take cover, but he can get back into the fight a lot faster. It also makes sense that his barrier is overall stronger and has more uptime for the simple fact that he can't attack while he's holding his barrier up, but Orisa can. The second and the third issues I'm going to combine because the solution is essentially the same for both. Right now, Reinhardt can easily get bashed or stunned when he's holding up his shield, and that makes him incredibly vulnerable. It just shuts him down entirely. But in addition to that, you have other characters like Lucio or Pharah who can just boop him and knock him around like a rag doll. And really, this Reinhardt character that's supposed to be like the frontline anchor of the team, and he's just knocked all over the place, and he really can't do anything about it. Now, I don't think the best solution is to just give him a Fortify-like ability. I think there are some ways that you could add to some CC resistance to the character and still make it different and unique than just what Orisa has. There's a bunch of different ways that you can address this. The first way is to just give him an ability that he can activate anytime he wants, and this gives him crowd control resistance. So right now, Orisa has Fortify, which makes her completely immune to crowd control and also decreases all incoming damage by 50%. You could give Reinhardt something that removes all crowd control, but instead of giving him damage resistance, maybe it increases his movement speed. Because remember, he's a melee-based character, he's got the charge, he does have the ability to move quickly when he needs to, although he does move slowly most of the time. So imagine you give him this kind of like charge effect thing, right? Where he basically activates it, he's immune to all crowd control, and then he can just run in a little bit faster than he currently does. We're not talking like a huge increase in speed here, guys. Just a little bit of a movement speed, so that way he can get to where he needs to without having to use the charge, because charge isn't really all that great for repositioning yourself. A lot of times you end up being more vulnerable than you would like. So you could have that. That's an activatable ability. You could put it on his reload because currently that isn't used for anything. Also, fun fact, during the Hanzo rework, they considered giving him a new ability on his reload button for the same reason. He doesn't use it, so they just figured it was an extra button that they could attach an ability to. They ended up not doing it, obviously, but for Reinhardt they could. Another option would be to give him a passive that simply reduces the effectiveness of all negative effects. So anything that slows or stuns or immobilizes or even increases damage, like the Discord Orb from Zenyatta, all of that stuff would be reduced by a certain percentage. I mean, you could just flat cut it in half, or maybe you reduce it by 25% or reduce it by 30% or something. Like, whatever it happens to be, obviously it would require some testing, but you could do that. Now, that wouldn't completely resolve the issue with Brigitte, because she could still shield bash him and force him to drop his shield, but if he's only able to get stunned for like half a second or a quarter of a second or whatever it happens to be, then he is going to be able to raise his shield up again very quickly, and while he will take some damage, it's not going to completely obliterate him like he currently gets now. Another option would be like something I mentioned in a previous video, where his passive just blocks or cancels out any incoming crowd control effects once every 10 seconds. But it only blocks that one thing, and then it goes on cooldown automatically for the 10 seconds, and it doesn't provide anything additional. So it's not like Fortify, where you get the damage resistance, and it doesn't last for like 3 or 4 seconds. It just blocks that one thing, and then that's it. So if Brigitte tries to stun you, it would just cancel it out. But if Brigitte tries to stun you, and then McCree tries, well, the Brigitte one will be cancelled, but the McCree one will still go into effect, because it's within that 10 seconds. Another option would be to simply make him more resistant to crowd control when he has his shield up and activated. Another possibility would be to actually give him some sort of shield ability. Now, I don't think he should get any sort of shield bash like what Brigitte has, because his shield is obviously significantly bigger and it would probably be problematic. But imagine if Reinhardt has some sort of shield push ability. So when he has his shield up, you press the left click just like you would with Brigitte in order to do the bash, but instead, Reinhardt kind of like throws his arm out, and what ends up happening is you get kind of like a Lucio boop effect on everybody that's in front of him. So basically, he like pushes everybody away. It wouldn't be like this crazy powerful thing, but it would be able to distance the enemy team away from him and create more of that zoning, more of that space that Reinhardt wants to create. I particularly like the shield push idea because it would give the character more power without actually giving him more damage or more health. It would just allow him to create that extra space. Obviously, you could use it for environmental eliminations and stuff like that, but, I mean, that's, you know, a rare thing. It's not like it's going to be on every single map and whatnot. But I think that the shield push would actually be quite powerful, because right now, when the enemies are running right up next to the Reinhardt, he really can't do anything. You're forced to constantly just kind of slowly back up, and rely on your team to do whatever they need to do, but Reinhardt doesn't have anything he can do. Like, if you drop your shield to attack, well, now the rest of your team is vulnerable. So I think giving him the ability to just say, nope, get out of here, and he just, like, pushes everybody away, I think that would be really cool. But now I'd like to know what you guys think about where Reinhardt is, and what changes you'd like to make, if any. Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching. Make sure to check out my Discord server. Follow me on Twitch and Twitter. The links for that stuff are down below. And remember, always blame the controller, because it's never your fault. Also, special thanks to all my Patreon supporters for helping to make this all possible. If you'd like to see what kind of cool rewards you can get for supporting the channel, check the links on screen and down below.